Hello and welcome to my video where I, as a longtime Kiss fan, take a look at the band's catalog of 20 studio albums that came out across their roughly 50-year career. I've noticed a lot of videos from Kiss fans from points all over showing up, engaging in similar exercises. And I'm sure it's tied to the fact that the band is coming to the end of what they promise is their final tour with a month's worth of shows left before they call it a career at Madison Square Garden in December. Um, I've been a fan for probably 40 plus years, dating back to 1977. And when I was in junior high, and I remember it pretty well in that I went to a friend's house and his brother had a copy of Kiss Alive 2. And I remember us listening to it and not just listening to it, but actually having the album. And when you opened it up and I saw this gatefold picture, which I think is one of the two or three most iconic photos from the band's career, it was like catnip to somebody my age, a male, junior high. It just it was awesome looking and it was awesome sounding on the album. Uh, and it was very hard to resist. It was not long after that that I actually went out and made my first album purchase, which was Kiss Alive 2, my own copy. And I remember bringing that home. And then one night, not long after that, my parents went out and I went and got my pillow and threw it down on the living room floor near where the stereo was that we had in our house. Took the speakers down from where they were, put that record on as loud as I could tolerate. I had the album itself and had it flipped open to this image and try to imagine what it must be like to experience a Kiss concert. And I think I was hooked from that point forward. And I think that's something about Kiss fans, and why they've had a 50-year career is there is something about the charisma of the band, the decisions they made, and what the identity of the band would be that really separate them from other bands that have kept fans um, identifying with the band, and many of them being loyal over decades and decades. And part of it is the music, and part of it is the image, and part of it is a number of other smart decisions they've made along the way, which we'll get into here as we talk about these albums. They also made a number of major missteps along the way, which to me just makes their story all the more interesting. It is amazing a band like that has endured for 50 years, and I would think no one probably is more amazed, no matter how self assured and arrogant they can be at times, than probably the band members themselves. To be thinking that what they created in 1973 would still be something that was of the interest that it's holding here in 2023 is just amazing, and the fact that they can still pull off a show in 2023 is also amazing. But maybe that's part of the magic of being behind makeup, and you you don't have to be yourself. You can you can be a character, and that endures. So anyhow, um, what I thought would make sense is to talk about these albums not in the order that I'm ranking them, but in reverse chronological order, which gives a little bit of a storytelling aspect to doing this video. So the album that is the most recent album, that's apparently going to be the last album, was 2012's Monster. Um, it is kind of exactly what you might expect from the band at this point. There is very few surprises left for them to spring upon people. It is well executed. They know their sound. It is one of two albums they did uh, their final two albums with two members of the band who joined and assumed the personas. And personas are such a big part of the strength of this band. I think that is an absolutely brilliant decision they made early on. Was not just putting on the makeup, but adopting the personas, and it helped fans identify with the band. It created this larger than life image for Gene Simmons that made him one of the cultural touchstones of the 1970s. But it also made it so here later in their career, much to the disdain of some fans, they've been able to endure with other people wearing the personas of original members, Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, when the same problems that cost the band in the first place and changed the lineup cropped up once again. So, so you have those two players, Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer, playing on both Monster and the album that precedes it, Sonic Boom. And that's kind of interesting because they come from outside of the band and are a little bit younger and were fans themselves. So while they know the parts and know the style, I think they brought a little bit of freshness to these last two albums, some things that well, they're both very good musicians, so um, that helps in what they're able to bring to the mix. Uh, Monster itself is, to me, a heavier album. It's more along the lines of some of the things they did in the 1980s after they had taken the makeup off from a sonic point of view. But it's a couple rungs above that. It's pretty professionally done. As I say, they know their tricks by this point. Hell or Hallelujah is a unquestionably great Kiss song that opens the album. It's got this intense, propulsive sound to it, and a descending solo that Tommy Thayer does. That then is a perfect fit for the final chorus. It's a great song. There's lots of solid songs through the middle of the album. I'm going to talk in terms of top tracks and deep cuts because I think part of the Kiss philosophy early on was they wanted to be a band. They saw themselves as being a band, even though they were a hard rock band that could produce commercial material and would get played on the radio, which was the conventional way of gaining an audience and selling records when their career started. Um, so a lot of their material does have is accessible to a broader audience. It has pop sensibilities and hooks, and even though it's heavier material than a lot of their peers at that time were putting out, they did consciously make that effort, and that continues throughout their almost their entire career. And Hell or Hallelujah is a good example of that. It is a hard rocking song, but uh, it's a melodic song, and there's a lot of material on this album that fits under that category. And then I'm going to talk in terms of deep cuts because I think that's a measurement of how much effort really went into the album, whether they were totally committed to the effort of making a great album or whether they phoned it in. In this case, Deep Cuts, Last Chance is the final almost ironically named album cut that we get. And it's a really good song. It's got a really nice bass intro from Gene Simmons and charges straight ahead into the song's peak, which is actually really this melodic solo by Tommy Thayer. Um, and then Right Here, Right Now is a bonus track, and I really like that song, even though it's not the smoothest overall song on the album. And the middle third is really good. It's got a great transition line uh, that leads you into the chorus that goes, "You got to hit them like a freight train coming. You drop the pedal with the motor running." It's actually a really well constructed song and has this tubular bells part. I like that song quite a bit. Generally, though, there's nothing surprising about Monster, and out of the 20 albums, I would rank it as number 16. It was preceded in 2009 by an album that had much anticipation from longtime Kiss fans because they hadn't gotten an album from the band in more than a decade. So the idea that they were going to come out with fresh material uh, generated a lot of conversation. Um, and I think it was the idea was publicly floated that they hoped that this was a return to the sound of their peak period in the late 70s when they were one of the biggest bands in the world and were totally on top of their game. And much to my surprise and delight, I think they came far closer to reaching that goal than I ever would have expected them to be able to do at this point in their career. Again, they're seasoned pros by this point, um, and they are playing with a lineup that is all together and working well. But the material is really good on this album. Modern Day Delilah is a excuse me, great album opener with this riff that repeats and allows the song to build. Never Enough is a good showcase for Paul Stanley's voice, which although it's kind of rough around the edges at this point, and that has only continued over the last 20 years of touring after years and years of the grind of what he put it through the way that he sings. It kind of works on this song and it works well enough on this album. The thing that I think put the album absolutely over the top for me is this was the album where Gene Simmons was able to get back in touch with that demon persona that he had from the 1970s and totally reconnect to it. So a song like Yes, I Know, Nobody's Perfect, which is probably the best Gene Simmons song since the 1970s, in my opinion, is is just an absolute highlight. It's playful, it's melodic, it's one of his best vocal deliveries. The lyrics are good. There's great harmonizing in the chorus. And then the attitude is there, the same attitude that made him such a character as that demon. Um, and he was the demon in his physical appearance, but there was this lecherous, womanizing character in how he presented himself in song. But it was always sort of with a little bit of sense of humor, and that's here too. He's boastful in his words, but then the song ends with him pleading in the last line, "Oh baby, please." And it's not hard to imagine that that's maybe the Gene Simmons after years of uh, being tamed and living with Shannon Tweed. That's maybe the wiser and older Gene Simmons speaking. Um, I, I love the song. I think it's a great highlight and a great part of the surprise here. But Russian Roulette is another good song from Gene Simmons with a really good bass part. Danger Us has a great riff. This album is consistent all the way through, very solid. And I have it rated a lot higher than some other Kiss fans. For me, this is all the way up at number 8. It is preceded by an album that had a huge hype, which was 1998 Psycho Circus. And it had huge hype because it was the four original members back together after they put the makeup on in 1995. And resumed touring and beyond anyone's expectations actually became bigger than they had ever been before, even during their heyday. Um, this was this was Kiss in an almost fantasy state in terms of the results that they were getting. But unfortunately, those same problems that caused the band to dissolve in the late 70s into 1980s um, had cropped up again, and they're really not a functioning recording unit by the time this album is made. It's a bunch of almost solo tracks, with a few exceptions, um, and that's really disappointing because the hype level was huge, as it should have been, given the way the album was set up. But Psycho Circus is a very well, heavily produced song that does kind of meet the standard of what you expected in terms of maybe what the sound and overall gravity of this album would have been. Um, but then as you listen to other songs, "Into the Void" is a good song, but it's basically an Ace Frehley solo song, and he'd been doing it for a while. And then the other songs, you realize some of them sound pretty good, but they're basically hollow. And I mentioned here, I finally found my way. In particular, uh, it's a Peter Criss song that's on here. I think out of the 20 studio albums, it may be the singular worst track on any of the 20 albums. So it has a distinction, just not one that's very good. So Psycho Circus was definitely a big disappointment for me, and I would have it at number 18. It is preceded in 1997 by the release, after being held for a while, of an album that was in progress when the reunion took place, and that was Carnival of Souls. And this is the right time to talk about this idea with Kiss, which is very much for me in the 1970s. I think they were innovators. The things they were doing, the decisions they were making, how they were changing the concert business and what the expectations were for what a concert could be, and how that changed the business of music. All of that was made them innovators in the world of music. But when they lost the plot around 1980, um, and really got themselves in trouble, they became imitators rather than innovators, and they chased a lot of different sounds, a lot of different trends, almost the same way that they had their. They were very good at chasing women. They became very good at chasing trends in music, uh, but probably not as successfully. And here it sounds like this could be a terrible idea for an album. Kiss trying to do a grunge-inspired album, uh, and this does not come off as like a typical Kiss album, but it does bring out some really interesting things from the band. And I find it to be an excellent album just to listen to when you just shed the expectations that it's a Kiss album and listen to it for what it really is. It's actually really well done, and a lot of the credit, from what I understand, goes to Bruce Kulick, the guitarist who came in the mid '80s and stabilized the lineup. Bruce does a lot of the work, including playing bass on a number of the songs on Carnival of Souls, and he's a very good and versatile guitar player. Jungle was the lead single from this album, and what a fantastic track that was. Again, talk about a pleasant surprise for longtime fans. This was the band sounding much more threatening and realistic uh, than maybe we had ever heard them, or at least hadn't heard them in decades. It has this churning, murky guitar, which is just sets this ominous tone, and then it explodes into this chorus with Paul Stanley's, vocal power, his voice punctuating it, like, and he sounds like someone is running to join a street fight. It is a deep, dark, and pretty fantastic piece of rock and roll. Master and Slave is another really good Paul Stanley song that shows the versatility of his voice. Deep cuts on this album. Childhood's End is probably one of the most surprising songs that you ever could have put on a Kiss record and hear, because Gene Simmons has always been very calculated, and the persona that he had was a very good front for Gene Simmons. But here he goes the opposite direction and talks about something that happened, or someone he knew from his childhood, which was a difficult childhood from everything that we've learned. He came to the United States at age 7. He didn't know how to speak English, with just his single mother accompanying him, and probably spent a lot of time alone, and delved into comic books and horror films, and that's where a lot of the psyche behind what he has done developed. Um, and somebody like that learns, to cover up and not be open with people, and yet here he is on this song, uh, really revealing himself quite a bit. And it's not a bad song musically either. It's a very surprising song to hear at this point. "I Will Be There" is also surprising. It's Paul Stanley singing a song of devotion to his young son who had recently been born, about a father's love for his son. Again, not what you would expect on a Kiss album, but a good song. And "I Walk Alone," I'll mention that too, because that's the last song on the album. It's the last song that Bruce Kulick plays on a Kiss record, and it's the first time that he gets to do a lead vocal. He does a very solid job. He does. It's a nice song. It's got some neat backward masking as part of the solo. Um, Overall, though, there's a lot of really good material on Carnival of Souls. It's just much different than what you'd expect from Kiss. Um, so that kind of tempers where you would rate it, but I still think it's very good. It's number 11 for me. Um, from there, we go to 1992's Revenge, which was a much anticipated album. It was the third go round with producer, music wizard Bob Ezrin, um, who gave the band one of the biggest developments in their whole career when he expanded their sound and expanded what was showed what was capable of the band being able to do in studio with Destroyer in 1976. Um, he comes back and he's always been close with the band members, apparently. And he, as I say, he's a very skilled music producer, classically trained musician. Um, you're not going to get an album that sounds bad for Bob Ezrin. There's just too much ability on his end, and I think the band also, liked working with him and knew how to trust him. And this album sounds fine. The one um, little bit of hesitation I would have with it is I just don't think there's the one or two killer tracks that would have absolutely put this over the top. Um, it's lacking that. It does have a really interesting lead single in the lead track on the album, "Unholy," which I think is finally, after um, a decade, Gene Simmons figuring out how to play his demon persona without wearing the makeup, which I think he really struggled with, who he was going to be and how he's going to present himself as a musician, both in how he looked and the kind of songs he was going to do. Um, he gets back in touch with that on Unholy, which is a pretty dark song, but suits his strengths very well. "God Gave Rock and Roll to You." I like this song. I probably like it a lot more than some people. And some of that is sentimental. This was a song that was going to be done for the soundtrack of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the sequel, which I think is what brought Bob Kulick to the project in the first place. I'm sorry, Bob Ezrin to the project in the first place. Um, and it's a good song. He does what he normally does, which is take the band in some unexpected directions sonically and makes them stretch out. Uh, but the sentimental part for me is Eric Carr, the drummer that joins the band in 1980 and replaces Peter Criss, and as an essential part in the band being able to survive through that transition. Um, Tragically passes away in 1991 of cancer. So that's during the course of this album being made. He's able to sing background vocals, I believe, on this song. He also appeared in the video playing the drums, although he was not strong enough to actually do that on the studio track itself. Um, so it's one last go around with a guy that deserves to be remembered very fondly by Kiss fans, and by and large is. Um, Deep Cuts, Every Time I Look at You is a very strong Paul Stanley ballad. Beautiful song, well produced. But it was the kind of power ballad a lot of bands were doing at that point, and it didn't feel like original an original breakthrough kind of song at that point, which probably kept it from being the hit it could have been otherwise. Domino is a good Gene Simmons track with this Bruce Kulick riff laid over the top. And Car Jam 1981 is another point on the album where they pay tribute to Eric Carr. They found an old studio recording of him jamming on drums, and they dressed it up with music a little bit and close the album with that. And that's a nice touch. Um, Revenge is good and solid, but it's probably doesn't quite meet the expectations when you say Kiss working with Bob Ezrin. Um, so I only have it at number 15. That's probably a little too low, but we'll stick with that right now. Preceded in 1989 by Hot in the Shade. And Hot in the Shade and Revenge are two albums that both stand out. I mean, the visual is so important with Kiss and their fans, going back to the personas and how how that helped uh, kind of create those connections to who was in the band. That it was rare you got album covers that didn't picture the band on the album cover, and here were back to back albums where that happened. And in fact, Hot in the Shade is the least amount of presence of any sort of Kiss influence on the cover of an album of any of the 20 albums, unless you look really closely at the postage mark that's up in the right hand part of the upper right hand part of the album cover. You wouldn't even know it's a Kiss album. And that's kind of an oddball decision to make. It sort of is an analogy for how this album turns out, though, because this album doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be. There's too many songs. Um, some are pretty good. Rise to It is the opening track, and it's a really good traditional Kiss style track that also has the novelty of the video that they created for it. You see Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley putting the makeup back on, which might have been foreshadowing of what was going to happen in the future. It's hard to say. Um, and you also have another thing that's interesting with this album and the single Forever, which becomes the band's second highest charting song in their entire recorded history. With which the irony of saying that is early on they did have that theory of uh, they wanted to be radio friendly, and that was something they were going to strive to do, and it happened here. And yet this is one of the worst selling albums in their entire catalog. And it's not for the lack of Forever being a great song. It is a really good song. You go back and watch video of it now. It's of a different style than almost anything the band has done. It's much more straightforward and classy is not a word you would necessarily use frequently in describing things with Kiss, but there's a certain element of class and dignity to that comes with the video for Forever. So that's interesting. And I think the secret strength of Forever is the way the song is structured. They leave room for a lot of drum parts to kind of propel the song forward. And again, that's Eric Carr. And then there's a really good acoustic solo that kind of caps it from Bruce Kulick. Um, so that's a good song. Hide Your Heart. They wanted it to be a big smash. It's written by Paul Stanley and Desmond Child, who then went out and got Holly Knight. So you have three people that all had written hit songs uh, for Kiss and for other bands, and working together. They just could not produce magic with that song. It's a fine song. There's nothing really wrong with it, but it has nothing that would put it over the top. Um, Boomerang I like just because it's fun, uh, and lets Bruce Kulick really uh, play kind of a wild guitar part while interchanging with Eric Carr. And then Little Caesar, I'll mention, it's the one time in the catalog where Eric Carr gets a lead vocal. and he does fine with it as well. But overall, this is an album that just doesn't leave much of an impression upon you. So for that reason, for me, it is at number 17. It's preceded in 1987 by a much stronger visual presence on the album cover. Crazy Night. This looks nothing like any other album cover. Crazy Night sounds like no other Kiss album. It's been rightfully pointed out by other people, I think, that this is Kiss. As I mentioned, they chase trends, and at this point, they're trying to sound like Bon Jovi and other bands like that, that were metal bands, hard rock bands that were creating a certain sound in the late 80s. And Kiss here and doing it actually turned to bringing keyboards on stage and letting Bruce Kulick play keyboards, which had never happened before in the history of the band. The keyboard songs, Reason to Live is a ballad, which is a very solid ballad, and easily could have been a hit song. Again, the subject matter and the core, the lyrics, lyrical content itself is above average from what you get from the band typically. But the video was a little bit stupid. Turn on the Night has keyboards mixed with guitar parts effectively. And I think those are the two best songs on this album. There's a lot of stuff that I just don't like, and it starts with the album's title track that I think is thematically kind of representing what they wanted it to be. Crazy Nights. Um, you you hear this right away, and it just does not sound like a Kiss song. It did do okay on the charts. Apparently, I think it reached the 30s in the United States, and something that just leaves you scratching your head. I did not learn this until years later. In the UK, it actually went to number 4 on their singles chart. But to me, it's like this does not sound like Kiss at all. This sounds like Kiss imitating someone else, and the rest of the album is just almost a blank slate. Bang Bang You is the best of the Gene Simmons songs, but the title pretty much reflects about it, how much effort and intelligence went into creating that song. I do not care for this album at all, and have it way down there at the bottom at number 19. In 1985, the album that preceded it, Asylum, you look at the image it's created here, and of course, um, this is the glam period of metal rock, and here they are trying to bring in the colorful elements, I guess, of glam to this cover. And it's a terrible cover. It's probably the worst cover that was ever created for a Kiss album. Um, and probably turned people off right away. And then they compounded that problem by creating videos for the songs on this album that were amongst their worst video efforts. In particular, All Night, um, which is kind of the chorus itself is kind of just not something that's real intelligent to begin with. But it does have a good hook, the song itself. So they did release it as a single, apparently. And uh, if you watch the video, it's a very strong candidate, in my opinion, for dumbest music video of the entire 80s, not just for this band, but for any band. It is embarrassingly bad. It is Kiss meets the Phantom of the Amusement Park level bad. Uh, so um, they did not help themselves with what they did with video here, and they did not help themselves with how they're looking and how they presented themselves on stage. And yet, you go back and listen to the album years later, and there is much better material here than your memory might suggest. King of the Mountain is a great opening track. It has Eric Carr with these thundering drums at the very beginning, leading into Paul Stanley, um, just at a very high intensity sort of song. Um, the title of the song is something of a cliche, but it really doesn't matter. The song totally works. Tears Are Falling is uh, almost singular amongst their work from the 80s. It is a great song. Um, it's not quite a ballad and it's not quite mid tempo. It's somewhere in between. It's got a really good hook that Paul came up with. And then it's got this excellent solo that kind of caps it towards the end from Bruce Kulick, which is all fine and good, except in the video. For some reason, Bruce Kulick has to stand under a shower head and get soaked as he's playing this playing this solo. So again, questionable decisions being made along the way, but they weren't musical questions that were tripping them up here. There was good music on Asylum. Who Wants to Be Lonely easily could have been a single. It may have been a single, and it's a song that sometimes gets stuck in my head as an earworm. It's really good. Any way you slice it is a good Gene Simmons song. Radar for Love, a good late track song. There's a lot of strong material on here, and Asylum is better than I remember it. I have it at number 14 here. I probably even should have it ranked a little bit higher. Um, it is preceded in 1984 by an album that was commercially very successful, Animalize, that returned the band to platinum status. They're filling arenas again, and opens with, excuse me, two really strong tracks. I've Had Enough, Into the Fire, which is just this gymnastic style of a keyboard, of a lead guitar exercise, um, with a new lead guitarist who was a fretboard guy in the style of what was very popular at that point from Van Halen on down. They brought in Mark St. John, and he could play that style of guitar. And Paul Stanley had apparently written a song like this and felt like he needed that style of guitarist to pull it off. And on this one song, it absolutely is a great fit. Paul's vocal is very strong, and this is one of the best Kiss songs of the entire 80s. And it's followed by one of their biggest hits of the 1980s, a much simpler song, a three-chord rock song in Heaven's on Fire. So, two very promising songs to start off the album. But I feel like this is probably one of those occasions where Paul Stanley, who's very much in charge, Gene Simmons is sort of in absentia at this point doing other things. And Paul thought, well, we've got two songs. We'll go into the studio and we'll figure out the rest. And they don't. There's virtually nothing else that I find interesting on this album. And I think they kind of left their fans hanging high and dry based on the expectations of those two songs and what they had done with the two albums prior to this to kind of win back the trust of their fans. So what they did with Animalize to me uh, almost a betrayal of their fans, and this is not delivering on what the promise was. And for me, that makes it the most or the least of the Kiss albums. I have it at number 20. I could listen to those first two songs all the time, and the rest of the album, if it never existed, I would not miss it. Um, so I had just referenced the albums that preceded it, the two immediately preceding it, and that was 1983's "Lick It Up" and 1982's "Creatures of the Night." This is a key period for the band. Their backs are against the wall. They have lost much of their fan base, and it's unclear whether they're even going to continue as a band, because commercially things are not going well at all. And you get another unsung hero here, and it's the producer Michael James Jackson, who comes in and starts to work with them and produces these two albums and understood what the sound of the band should be, how to get them back on track. They were willing to listen to him and work hard on the ideas that they came up with together. Michael James Jackson, in particular, understood what a weapon he had in Eric Carr, and Eric Carr's work on these two albums is fantastic, particularly on Creatures of the Night. Uh, but there's also a new guitarist, the first replacement guitarist who took Ace Frehley's place in the band, and that's Vinnie Vincent, who's a good songwriter and a decent guitarist, but not a great bandmate, and he can only last two records before they're want to part ways with Vinnie Vincent. But look it up. They took the big step and finally took their makeup off for the first time since the band was formed. Uh, did the big reveal on MTV, got some attention for that. Followed it up immediately with the debut of the single for "Lick It Up," and that's a good song. Another kind of meat and potatoes three chord rock song like Heaven's on Fire, and got a similar sort of reception where people were hearing it and liking Kiss because that's how it sounded like what they remembered Kiss sounding like. Exciter opens the album. I think that's a great track. It is just pure rocket fuel. Um, and it's what I think Paul Stanley's ideal sound for the band would be for the '80s. They couldn't keep it up, but for this one song, they just lay it down. And it's also noteworthy because they didn't think Vinnie Vincent could quite deliver the sort of solo the song deserved. So you get a guest soloist coming in, and it ends up being Mr. Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo himself, Rick Derringer, playing on a Kiss song, and he delivers a fantastic solo, one of the best post Ace Frehley solos on any Kiss song that I can think of. And that is very exciting material when you hear that for the first time. All Hell's Breaking Loose was another single, very good, solid material. Gimme More, A Million to One, and then On the Eighth Day are the closing tracks of the album. And A Million to One is again Paul Stanley being showcased and could have been a single. Again, Michael James Jackson just gets it. And On the Eighth Day, he does it with Gene Simmons, where it's a album closer, and it's not letting Gene just get out of control. He plays it pretty straight. It's a big, broad-shouldered song. Um, Gives room for the drums to kind of carry it. It's just kind of this epic closer for the album, and it's one of the best closing tracks on a Kiss album that I can think of. So overall, Lick It Up, really good work from the band. Um, I have it at number 9, and it's preceded by an album that doesn't sell very much, but is so important because it reestablished the bona fides for this band. You get the idea from the album cover, which is a brilliant album cover, in my opinion. Exactly what the packaging promises is what you get on the inside. It is dark and kind of semi threatening and serious. Um, and it is anchored by Michael James Jackson creating this sound where he brings the drum sounds that Eric Carr is creating so far forward in the mix. You rarely hear that in rock music. But he realized that he had, a monster talent there, and it could totally work in the concept of what they wanted to do with the sound they wanted to create here. And the outcome is excellent. And it starts with Creatures of the Night, the beginning, uh, the first cut off the album, which opens with, again, this huge opening blast from Eric Carr's drums. And the rest of that song is virtually perfect in what it should be. It's a great Paul Stanley vocal, and just sets this tone that this is not Kiss being cartoonish. This is Kiss being back to uh, sort of just a hard rocking band. I Love It Loud is the last of the Gene Simmons makeup era persona classics. It suits Gene very well. There's a call and response part that kind of has him standing there mid stage. And that's a song that, got played a lot in concert, gets played at sporting events and basketball arenas to get the crowd involved. Very successful Kiss song overall. War Machine is, a fantastic oddity. It's a wonderful song in its own right. Wonderful is not the right word because it's actually very dark. It's comparable to the darkness of Jungle on Carnival of Souls. Um, what's so uh, fascinating about it is it's a co-write between Gene Simmons and Brian Adams shortly before Brian Adams does Cuts Like a Knife. Uh, but somehow that chemistry works and they create a dark and churning masterpiece of a song. There's no mugging for the camera here. It's playing it very straight, and um, it's a fantastic song. The deep cuts, there's so many. I mean, there's really no weak cut on this album. Keep Me Coming is another showcase for Paul Stanley's vocal strength. I Still Love You is unlike any song maybe in the 80s that they do. It's not a ballad, but it's slower. It's not bragging, but it's kind of lamenting and begging for a lover to not leave them. You just don't get material like that from this band, but they pull it off very well. Rock and Roll Hell sort of tells the story of Ace Frehley, who is pictured on the cover but doesn't play on the album. He's pictured on the cover for contractual reasons. But Ace wanted out of the band. He had addiction issues, which had been hindering him for a while, and it was finally time. So they write this song about his experience, and in true Kiss fashion, where there really is no irony, Ace himself then covers the song about his own departure from the band a couple years after that, and does a fine job on a solo album of his own. And then Danger is a track that for me, it closes side one. It may be the uh, Michael James Jackson getting Kiss into a place where, as far as an unrecognized song that shows exactly how great that match was, Danger is it for me. It is just a premier showcase for Paul Stanley's vocal abilities. It starts off strong and just grows stronger and stronger through the end, and is just a pure adrenaline ride all the way through. Love the song, love the album. A lot of fans do, even though, as again, it doesn't sell as well historically as some other albums. Very important because it does rebuild their credibility, and I have it at number 5 in the 20 albums. From there, we go to 1981's The Elder, which is the most divisive album in the entire catalog of the band. And, it was Bob Ezrin coming back, but he's got a serious chemical problem and other problems undermining the band. And they really don't know what they want to do. And they go on and take a flyer on trying to create this music soundtrack around a short story that Gene Simmons had written, and decide it's going to be a concept album and it's going to be progressive rock in styling, a prog rock album from Kiss. Nobody would ever expect that. Certainly, their record company didn't, um, and their fans didn't because they truly didn't know what to do with this. And the Elder was kind of the bottoming out of a number of things that led to a great drop in the band's overall popularity. That said, there are a lot of fans, and I am one of them, that can look at things that are on this album, listen to it, and really find things that they like. A World Without Heroes was a good single and has a curiosity factor of being co-written by Lou Reed, who's a legendary rock figure. Kind of the band he was in, the Velvet Underground, uh, set the stage for what became punk rock. I mean, he's the last guy you'd expect to write on a Kiss song, but Bob Ezrin produced him before this, and Lou Reed, I guess, co-wrote three songs on The Elder. Actually, Dark Light does not get talked about. It's the one Ace Frehley song that's on here, and Ace doesn't even really go to Toronto, where the album is recorded, where Bob Ezrin is based out of. Um, but he does deliver a song here that, because of this extended solo that's in the middle of it, uh, I think is a great, absolutely lost Kiss classic song. The solo is very long, as I say, and it kind of has this exotic drum part built into it from Eric Carr that accompanies it. It's a highlight of this album for me. Only You and Under the Rose are nearby on side one, and almost create like the suite of songs to me. Under the Rose shows the commitment of the new drummer Eric Carr, who this is his first album with playing with the band, and he's so eager to be a part of this that he actually teaches himself how to play guitar so he can write a song. And he writes Under the Rose. Gene Simmons does the lyrics. And then there's this guitar solo part that Bob Ezrin runs through some multi-tracking that I really love the sound of that. I mean, there's some interesting things in this album. It's just so odd and so not what people were expecting, that it does not perform well at all, and almost sinks the band's career. So that said, I personally don't mind listening to it at all now. Um, and it's certainly got more integrity than some of the things that I've talked about already. I have it at number 12. From there, we go to 1980s Unmasked, which is the second of two albums that basically have the lineup. Um, Again, you have Peter Criss's picture on the album cover for Unmasked, which is an unusual album cover. Uh, it's not artistically unappealing, looking like a comic book, but it is kind of strange, and it's most strange because it ends with a last panel where it has a guy saying, "I still say they stink," um, which is an odd thing to put in record stores when you've got fans that are already on the fence about whether or not they think this is a band they still like. Um, so that was a curious decision, but the lineup is not Peter Criss, who doesn't play on this album at all, but it is Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, who has a huge presence on this album and on Dynasty, and I'll get to that in a second, and the drummer Anton Fig, who played on Ace's very successful Kiss solo album 1978, and then is brought in by the producer Vinnie Poncia, who is the producer for this album and Dynasty, the album that precedes it. Um, and you have that lineup, which I think could have been, if they had stuck it out, a lineup that delivered music at a higher level, maybe a more mainstream accessible level, which I think they deny it. But Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons were young and they were hanging out in New York. And I think they felt the pressure of hanging out with the beautiful people, lots of them musicians running in the crowds with them, who looked at them as kind of this curiosity and not being real musicians. And I imagine that stung a little bit. And I think they they got the idea that they wanted to prove that they could do the same things as the people that they were socializing with, and wanted to be their peers. And they try to do that on these two albums. They do it more successfully on Dynasty, but Unmasked is a good album. It's just, again, they take their fans by surprise. This is an album that's actually a pop album, and that's not what people were expecting from this band, because that wasn't what the roots of the album, the band's following, actually what was all about. So it feels like an uneven album in that sense. They do give Ace Frehley three songs that he sings here, which is the same as what they do on Dynasty. And I think there's a reason for that. Even though Ace was struggling with addictions at this point in his life, I think Gene and Paul, who are nothing if not smart, although sometimes too smart for their own good, it seemed, understood that Kiss and what actually worked for them musically took form when Ace came in and joined the band. And he adds a spice to how they play, an element that just changes things. Peter Chris could leave, and that's okay. Another drummer could do what Peter Chris could do, but they were less sure of letting Ace leave the fold. So they're trying to cater to him, particularly after the success he had on the solo album, and they give him a lot of space to show off his his growing creativity and confidence, and he delivers very nicely on Unmasked and Dynasty. On Unmasked, his one of the singles is "Talk to Me," and I really like that song. Um, Again, it's unfamiliar territory from where Kiss had been previously, where they were just caricatures. Here, it's Ace actually singing a song about you know to a woman or women about um, I don't just want a physical relationship because I'm a rock star. I'd really like to have a real relationship with you. So that's different. Is That You is the most Kiss like um, cut on the album. It opens it, and it's a good song that Paul Stanley sings, although he didn't write it. Naked City is Gene Simmons' answer of that same thing that I was talking about. Of he's young and he's in New York, and he writes a song that is actually a really good song here. And I think it's the one song that does the best job of having one foot in kind of the traditional Kiss camp sonically of what they sound like, but one foot in the camp of this pop direction that they want to go in with this album. And it's a really good song. The more you listen to it, the more you realize how solid of a song it is. It's also got a curiosity element to it in that this is Gene Simmons at this point who has been dating Cher, which turns some fans off. That's a little too Hollywoodish and not very much rock and roll. Um, but he has a line in this song about older women love younger men. I got a feeling I'm in trouble again. And it's you just wonder, is he singing about Cher there, or I don't think he's dating Diana Ross yet at this point. After his relationship with Cher breaks off, but that happens not long after that. They're older than he is, and it's just kind of funny to think about that line being in that song and what it might actually mean. Um, Shandy was a single, and it was okay. It's the last video that Peter Criss actually appears in for the band. It's the last thing that he really does. Um, Torpedo Girl and Two Sides of the Coin. Those are the other two Ace Frehley songs. Torpedo Girl, in particular, has this syncopated beat to it. I love that song. Some fans just don't like it very much at all. I have no idea, again, what he's possibly singing about, but it doesn't matter. I love the way the song just rocks along. And You're All That I Want is the closing track, and it is very collaborative. It shows that the Anton Fig version of Kiss is still capable of producing music together that actually works. There's a demo, an acoustic demo of this song that gets released later that's actually even better. But there's a lot of good material on Unmasked. Again, just the wrong album at the wrong time. So for that reason, it's number 13. Before it is Dynasty, 1979. Again, an album that for a lot of Kiss fans is pretty divisive. And that starts off with the idea that I Was Made for Loving You is a disco song. And it does have a disco beat, but I think it's actually a rock song in my head. The guitar parts from Ace Frehley, which are very strong, sort of save it. It's just a mainstream sort of rock song that has a disco beat. Uh, Whatever it is, it was extremely well produced and had a great groove and has Kiss fighting upstream against forces of them not being a band that was very popular. The popularity was on the wane at this point, and yet they deliver a single that's the third highest charting single in their career, the highest non-ballad single that they produced in their career. And when you consider the forces that were not going to sign on to Kiss at this point because they're disappointed of them going in this new direction, it's probably the best performing song on the charts that the band ever had. And it probably, well, I'm not going to say it probably deserves to be, because Rock and Roll All Night is undeniably a great rock and roll song, no matter what classification you put it in. But I Was Made for Loving You is an interesting single. It's very well produced, very well written. It is the band at a different level. It's followed by 2000 Man, which is Ace Frehley covering this obscure old Rolling Stones song. He totally makes it his own. It becomes one of his signature songs, along with Shock Me and um, just love 2000 Man. It's a great surprise the first time you hear it, and it's a song that you are going to identify with Ace Frehley for the rest of his career. Sure Knows Something is the third cut, and it is almost as good as I Was Made for Loving You. Everything about it is well conceived and well crafted. It's a very pretty song. It's a mainstream song. It's got great harmonies. It could have very easily been a hit. Um, so you got those three songs right off the bat, and this is, that's three really great songs to start off an album, and then they really don't relent the rest of the album. There's a lot of great work the rest of the album. Magic Touch is a really strong Paul Stanley track. Has falsetto singing by him, which sometimes doesn't work the best in their songs, but it works really well in this cut, uh, in offsetting the harder edge that's otherwise set in the song. Hard Times is Ace Frehley uh, taking on kind of an autobiographical look at growing up on the streets in New York, and the rhythm of the song that he and Anton Fig come up with, it feels gritty like the streets of New York. It's a very good song in my opinion. And then Save Your Love is the album closer. It's another song from Ace. And again, it shows the band is working collaboratively. Paul Stanley starts singing the chorus, and then Ace sings on top of him, and it's got a very driving beat. I like that song a whole lot. I like Dynasty. It's just like a very complete Kiss album, so that therefore I have it ranked pretty high. Number seven out of the 20 albums. You have the break before Dynasty, which is the four solo albums, which we're not going to get into here. But on the other side of that break is the classic heyday era of Kiss, with three albums in particular. One in 1977, which is Love Gun, which the album cover is exactly how this band wanted to be perceived and how fans were perceived. Everything was in alignment here, and that includes the music on the inside of the album. This is the band delivering exactly what fans want, and it is one of the very best albums in the catalog. Love Gun is one of the very best hard rocking songs of the latter half of the 70s, in my opinion. Musically, it could have been at the very top of that list. Um, it, the only regrettable thing, and probably the thing that kept it from being played on the radio, is the title itself is obviously referring to Paul Stanley talking about his own equipment, which was kind of just over the top in 1977, and maybe still today. It's just like, okay. Um, but it doesn't take away from what's there musically, which is just he, great singing. That staccato drum part that really drives the song. This guitar solo that Ace comes up with that comes crawling up out of that mix and goes skyrocketing upwards. It's a fantastic song. Shock Me, I mentioned just a few minutes ago. It's the other signature Ace Frehley song. It's the first time he sings lead on any Kiss album, and it's great. And it's even greater on Alive 2, which comes out later in '77. Certainly one of the signature Ace Frehley moments in the entire time that he's in the band. I Stole Your Love is a superb album opener and was also a concert opener for them. High intensity, uh, just perfect subject matter. Deep cuts, Christine 16, Almost Human. These are Gene Simmons' Demon Persona songs. Um, Plaster Caster is a little bit not necessarily in line with that persona, but it is Gene singing about a groupie who has an unusual hobby, and is more of a mainstream sort of song despite the subject matter, and is a really good song. It's just almost all the way through. Love Gun delivers exactly what you're looking for, and does it with a lot of style. So out of the 20 albums, I've got Love Gun at number 6. From here, as the number 6 album, we go to 1976, and the first of two albums that came out that year, which was Rock and Roll Over, which, um, just from appearance's sake, I think if you were young and walked into a record store and saw this cover of a new Kiss album in the store, there was a very good chance you were going to buy this album. This is a almost perfect Kiss album cover, and it has a lot of strong material in it. However, I will say that I do not think it is quite as strong an album as the two that bookend it. And I think there is a reason for that, and that is that the experience earlier in '76 of making Destroyer with Bob Ezrin, who demanded a lot out of the band, um, carried through into the decision making about Rock and Roll Over. And I think they got the idea that they didn't have to live exactly by the rules as Bob Ezrin had laid them down, and could go back to doing what they knew best and following their instincts. And as a result, there's some material on this album that's not fully realized to the strengths that it maybe could have been. This, in my opinion, then again is one of those examples where ego got in the way of actually doing everything they could to make a good product, which is a shame because there is some good material to work with here on Rock and Roll Over. Certainly, Calling Dr. Love is a signature song for Gene Simmons and the band. I mean, it's one of the best known tracks. And Hard Luck Woman was a significant song that I believe cracked the top 20, and is a very good ballad. I Want You is a classic Paul Stanley song. Kiss does this a number of times through the catalog where the song goes slow and then very hard. Um, and that is used to great effect here. Deep Cuts. Take Me is an example of a song that it's not a bad song, um, but I think, I don't know, I kind of get uh, reflections of King of the Nighttime World from the previous album, that this is a song that's sort of along the same lines sonically. It's just not as fully realized as King of the Nighttime World was. And there's some other songs on this album that I would say similar things about. Making Love is a good album closer. It is Kiss. doing their best Led Zeppelin style song, and that is actually very pretty successful. But overall, a lot of fans really like Rock and Roll Over. I do not like it to the level of some other people, and I think it's the 10th best album out of the 20 albums. And that's, again, looking in context because the album they delivered earlier in '76, Destroyer, their masterpiece with Bob Ezrin, uh, one of, if what happened with Creatures of the Night and Look It Up was them responding at one of their lowest moments, Destroyer was them responding strongly at the first moment of peak opportunity, which was coming off Alive, and they had gone from being this constantly touring, hard rocking band that created uh, quite a following just based off the concert experience that they provided to being national figures and having a song that would identify with the band with Rock and Roll Over. I'm sorry, Rock and Roll All Night. And they had a chance to go higher, and their manager Bill Aucoin recognized that and went out and got Bob Ezrin to produce this album because Ezrin had a reputation with Alice Cooper and others of taking artists and um, adding to what they were already capable of doing and creating an even larger, more sophisticated sound for them. And he sets out to do that with Destroyer. There are funny stories that are told about uh, Destroyer was enough of a departure from what the band had been previously that when uh, it was turned into a coin and the record company, they weren't very sure about the material. It was that different, and they weren't sure that it was going to produce the results that they wanted. And right off the bat, that they kind of got those feelings confirmed until the single, which was the B side for Detroit Rock City, Beth, started being played on the radio. And then all of a sudden, uh, everything got turned upside down, and this became a huge album for this band. Reputationally, a huge album, deservedly so. The material, almost from beginning to end, is just excellent. And it's Ezrin really sitting down, working with these guys and showing them things that they could do to create their sound and investigating what the psyche of the band and the various characters in the band was all about and developing material that reflected that. Detroit Rock City is about the most perfect Kiss song that was ever written. Perfect for Paul Stanley's voice, perfect in terms of the style with the how driving the beat of the song is. It speaks of the fans and the band and their relationship. It has the understated but brilliantly effective guitar solo for Ace Frehley. It's just an ideal song to start off this album, and it's quite a statement. Shout It Out Loud is them responding, I think, to the idea we want another song in the vein of Rock and Roll All Night, and they give you Shout It Out Loud, which is a tremendous song. Actually, it might even be a better song. I don't think the hook is better, but the song overall might be more musical. It's got three-part harmonies in the chorus, and um, again, speaks directly to the fans about the experience of being what it is to be a Kiss fan, and it is a tremendous song for the band. God of Thunder, strange little song in that Paul Stanley wrote it, and the demo, if you've ever heard it, it almost sounds like he's anticipating those disco leanings that he had. And he thought it would be his song, but Bob Ezrin uh, realized that this was perfect fodder for Gene Simmons, and it became, a signature song for the Demon persona, and one of the anchor songs for this album. Do You Love Me and Beth were both very important songs for Kiss and the growth of Kiss, in that their audience up to this point has was largely teenagers and uh, people in their 20s, and they were male. Um, and they grow the audience and they find a way to create material here that women are going to hear, females are going to hear, and identify with the way that Paul Stanley's singing in "Do You Love Me" directly to a female audience, and the same thing with Beth. So these are very important songs and beautifully realized and produced. "Do You Love Me"? I mean, you could make a case that that's one of the best mainstream songs in the entire Kiss catalog. Um, haven't even got to "King of the Nighttime World." What a great follow-on song to Detroit Rock City to start off the album. And then "Flaming Youth," I mentioned that. I mean, that has the bones to have been one of Kiss's all-time best songs. It starts off for the first um, minute or so with the opening verse and the way it sounds. It is headed in that direction. And then Ezrin gets a little bit too ambitious for his own good. And in the chorus, he adds a part that sounds like a calliope. And that's just pushing it a little too far. And unfortunately, it kept that song from probably realizing its full potential commercially. It's still a great song. I listen to it now and I think, man, how did this not be a hit song? This is a fantastic Kiss song. It's all the way through the album. It is a fantastic Kiss album, and for that reason, um, I have it at number two. So, as I said, it is preceded by "Alive," which is a career-making move for the band. Before "Alive," the struggle is real. Um, Casablanca Records is on the verge of teetering with bankruptcy, and Bill Aucoin is putting tours on his credit card, and uh, it's looking like this is make or break time, and it was. So they called the band in off the road, and they have very little time to deliver the album that becomes "Dressed to Kill," um, and it's very short. I believe it's only 8 songs. All that taken into account as background material, it's an outstanding album. I mean, it does contain "Rock and Roll All Night," which would make uh, be the keystone for almost any Kiss album to instantly be considered one of their better albums. I mean, it is a singular song in their catalog. "Come On and Love Me" is was an important song. They were trying specifically to write a song that could break through and get played on the radio. And that did happen in some markets, and apparently Detroit was one of those markets. And so that led up to building up some of the hype and anticipation for those Cobo Hall shows that became Kiss Alive. So "Come On and Love Me" kind of has a special place in their catalog. "Rock Bottom" is a great cut that for those skeptics out there who think there's just not a lot of musical ability in the band, there's that great dual acoustic guitar opening part to it. And then it breaks off into this very heavy part, um, which on "Alive" becomes one of those songs that is just made alive as great as it really was. It's a classic Kiss song. "Love Her All I Can." I think that is a significant song. It's the song that leads into "Rock and Roll All Night." Those two songs to close this album um, are two of the best, maybe the best overall closing combination songs for any Kiss album. And "Love Her All I Can" gets overlooked, but I think you listen to it, it's really interesting, and it's so raw, and the guitar parts in it are so powerful that you hear literally this band's beginnings, and you understand that where they came from and what they were like at the very beginning. It was not very far removed from where punk rock was coming from. This was a band that came from the streets and had that New York flavor to them. Um, Even if that went away after Alive to a certain degree and went in a different direction. Early on, they were a uh, hard rock sort of American band from the early 70s, the first part of the 70s, um, and deserve to be recognized in that light. And Love Her All I Can is a good example of that. So is She. That was a great song on Alive, and it's pretty good here. Overall, for those reasons I mentioned, the circumstances, I think Dress to Kill, one of their better albums for sure, number four. Uh, so then we're down to two albums. Hotter Than Hell, the circumstances are similar. They need an album that's turned around quickly, that can possibly produce record sales, and they pull the band in and put them in the studio. Hotter Than Hell itself, the track is Paul Stanley kind of working from the sound of Freeze All Right Now, and creating his own interpretation of that. And it is one of the stronger Kiss songs in the entire catalog. Got to choose, I believe, openings to the album, and could have easily been a song from the debut album. It just sounds like Primal Kiss, perfect mainstream fit for exactly what this band is all about. Let Me Go Rock and Roll is good here. It's phenomenal on Alive as the encore song. I think that is one of the absolute best performances the band ever put on record. Deep cuts, you get more songs that feed into Alive and become huge songs. Parasite, another example. An Ace Frehley written song. Gene Simmons sings it, but another example of how close I think the roots of Kiss and its musical influences were to punk rock's influences. Watching You is very good here, and again, On Alive is huge, and Going Blind is kind of this oddball, strange song, but it's Gene Simmons' favorite song apparently of any song that he's written for Kiss. Maybe not that hard to believe because it is a strange song, and he can be a strange guy at times. But a lot of great material on Hotter Than Hell, and for that reason, I have it at number three, which leaves only one album, and we haven't had a number one album for the list yet. So any uh, uh, any suspense is ended. The first album is the number one album, um, and deservedly so. I list seven songs here out of the 10, and I think these are seven stone cold hard rock classics that came off one debut album from one band right off the streets in 1974, which is just kind of incredible. Strutter is an unbelievable song to open the album in different circumstances with a little different build up for it. I think easily could have been a big hit song. Um, Deuce is really the band kind of showing their chops as a hard rocking outfit, and what a concert opener it is for the Alive era shows. 100,000 Years is my personal favorite Kiss song. I love the interplay of guitars between Ace Frehley and Paul Stanley on that song, on top of this rhythm section that kind of rolls along between Gene and Peter Criss. I really don't know where that song quite came from. Um, the subject matter itself is kind of goofy from Paul Stanley, the concept of a guy being gone for 100,000 years, but that doesn't matter because this song just rocks so well. Um, Absolutely love that song. Nothing to Lose is one of their classic songs, and I think it was their first single. Um, and you listen to the MTV unplugged album and hear the rendition that ends that show with the four original members plus Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer and the six of them together. The amount of musicality that that it goes into that version of the song really shows that criticisms that this is just a band about flash and fire are unfounded. I mean, this is really good, solid music and really well done, um, even in this early stage with the debut album. Firehouse is, the song that it's got a great rhythmic part to it that uh, after the break at the end where Gene would breathe fire and then it kind of reprises. Uh, it just goes to another level, in my opinion, and um, it's a song actually early on I wasn't that big a fan of, but it has really grown on me, and I think it's justifiably one of their classics. Cold Gin is the first song Ace really wrote for the band, continues to be played to this very day. Just this iconic guitar part with it, and then Black Diamond was their show closer for many years, sometimes still is, and um, just I'm not sure how they came up with the song about a prostitute from the streets of New York, but again, it doesn't matter because the song itself musically rocks so hard. Um, this is just an unbelievable effort for a band coming out of the chute, and as I said, for me, is a pretty clear choice as the number one album out of the 20 albums the band has given us. So that's a lot of territory. Uh, I will, in full confession, admit that this is the shortened version of me talking about the band's albums. There's just so much to talk about and so many things that have happened through the years. It's been hard in some of the earlier versions to keep it under 2 hours, but here we've got it under an hour and a half. So I guess this is probably going to be the version I'll release. And it's been fun. I mean, all along, it's been entertaining and they're finishing on a high note. The As I mentioned earlier, the staging that they've got now for this final go round is just unbelievably epic in scale, and they probably deserve it for the kind of career that they've had and the influence they've had on the music industry. So I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. I appreciate you listening to my video. And the last thing I would say to you guys and to anyone that's a fan of the band or the band themselves is thanks for the memories. It's been a heck of a ride. Thanks for listening.